Now, all right, we're going to finish up the lecture on Mother Jones. And kind of looking at a changing, we're basically left off, we can go back here. We were leaving off on the rise of organized labor. And we were looking at the differences between radical unions and trade unions. Radical unions are greatly responsible for getting the numbers up. They were very inclusive. Inclusive as far as they didn't recognize social boundaries between men and women, black, white, Mexican, Chinese, and unskilled and skilled labor. So their successes were numbers, and to some degree, for the first 10, 15 years of the labor movement going into the mid 1880s, they were the main source of unions. That's going to give way to examples of trade unions like the AFL, which are going to be much more pragmatic, right? They're going to work with, they're going to focus on skilled labor, and they will be discriminatory, trying to get as much leverage as possible. And unfortunately, the discrimination is going to leave a lot of people out of the lurch. In the early labor movement. They're up against basically a political, both parties are becoming politically corrupt, influenced by the vast amounts of wealth that are developing as a result of the rise of corporations. The Republican Party started out as an anti-slavery party, pro-civil rights, and rhetorically, they're still for civil rights, but they're becoming more and more a party that is championing big business. So this is what labor is up against. They're basically, nobody is listening to them within the political institutions, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So circling back to Mother Jones, this is one of the things that she's most known for, championing children that were working in factories. So she started out focusing on coal miners, and she would hear stories of little children, as you see here, 6, 7, 8 years old, working in textile factories, 12, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for very little pay and incredibly dangerous conditions. And certainly she believed that, but she thought it was grossly exaggerated. And so what she did is she kind of went undercover and got a job at a textile factory. And not only were there children working in that factory, they were extensively running it, with 6, 7, 8-year-olds working in these dangerous situations, and 14-year-olds who were the shop stewards, the managers. So she goes to the press and says this is happening, and the press doesn't cover it. Why wouldn't the press cover it? Seems like an extraordinarily worthy thing to cover. Probably would sell newspapers.
Corporations own the media.
Exactly. So she's a very effective activist, and what effective activists understand is how to get attention. So what she does is she goes to basically families who have their children working in these factories and says, "Can I borrow your kids?" and marches them about 100 miles to Theodore Roosevelt's summer home. And on the way, she's stopping off at town squares, universities, churches, with this spectacle of children who are missing limbs or fingers. They're stooped over. They definitely have visible signs of not having enough nutrition. And so from her autobiography, this is what she did at one of these events where she's marching the children. Here's a textbook on economics. This is at a university she's doing this. I said, pointing to a little chap, James Ashworth, who was 10 years old and who was stooped over like an old man from carrying bundles of yarn that weighed 75 pounds. He gets $3 a week. And his sister, who is 14, gets $6. They work in a carpet factory 10 hours a day, while the children of the rich are getting their higher education. So if you read her autobiography, she's constantly contrasting the different conditions between classes. So here she's at this university, people your age, and now you got these kids going, so you guys can live in luxury in this plush university, understand where that is coming from. So now the press is covering it because this old lady is marching a bunch of children for 100 miles and stopping off at places to place. So this is, it's not going to be successful in like the next week, child labor is eliminated, but it's successful and it gets a national conversation going on, right? People are now talking about this. Is this what the founding of the United States had in mind, to have a class of children just because they came from the wrong side of the railroad tracks are subjected to these dangerous conditions? And this is a textile factory. So there's hundreds of these pictures you can find online. Barefoot in a factory, extraordinarily dangerous, get an infection. Back then, they don't understand. They're just learning about microbes and antibiotics and stuff like that. But typically, most people who get a cut, you could die from that. This kind of really shows how dangerous this is. Barefoot, balancing next to a pulley that is spinning at a high velocity, right? Today, like OSHA would mandate a shroud being put on that, and absolutely not having a child barefoot balancing on this, because if he gets tired, and he could get tired, if he falls in there, his whole body gets mangled. What they're doing, this is how they would lose limbs, fingers. You can see up there, he's holding a little metal rod and he's maintaining the tension of the spool. And if he's not careful, he'll get a finger cut off if he puts it in there. These are coal miners, 8, 9, 10 years old. Oops. You notice their faces have soot on them. Where is most of that soot probably going? In their lungs, right? These children are not going to live long lives as adults. More pictures of kids working in coal mines. Kids getting off work, getting ready for happy hour, I suppose. I don't know. This would be a common, during the progressive era, a political cartoon picture, just depicting some fat cat, rich guy eating children so he gets fatter. It's demonstrating his accumulation of wealth. So what she's up to here is she's advocating reform at the federal level. Why is that important?
Because it wouldn't just be like a state type thing. It would be like for the whole nation.
Yeah, why is it important? Because that's what she's going to hear, like states' rights. States, this is kind of the bedrock of the Constitution, right? The federal government should have very little power over the states. States have what are called, what are they called? In our federalized system, they have, I'm forgetting the word, not enumerated powers, but state powers where, they can pass laws, for how old one needs to work for in order to be employed, marriage laws, voting laws, and all of that. Why is that going to be ineffective if you just focus on the state laws if this is going on and one believes this shouldn't be going on? Why is it like, okay, let's focus on Mississippi?
It would just move production to another state.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. For some reason, activists are successful in Mississippi. No more child labor. Well, those factories are just going to move across the state to Alabama. And they will just keep doing that. Right. And eventually, right, when it's not until really the 1930s that child labor laws are codified at the federal level. And that's when corporations go south of the border or across the ocean in order to exploit labor. So she's, again, the March of the Mill Children, it was publicizing the main purpose of the march was to expose the harsh realities of child labor and to pressure lawmakers into immediate action. And to some degree, it worked, but it's going to be a slow process because, again, the political system is geared towards listening and maintaining corporate interests over the interest of actual human beings. I mean, the courts in, 1882, have declared that corporations are people with certain rights that cannot be violated, right? To some degree, that makes sense, especially for small businesses, but the idea of a corporation that has that much power and can affect people's lives within an increasingly centralized economy, it's problematic. It makes sense. Like my wife was a small business owner, and when you get an LLC, what that does, how that protects you is if she hurt one of her clients, they can go after her business, but they can't take our home or our assets, right? If you give that kind of citizenship to a corporation, well, they've got money, man. And if they hurt you, good luck lawyering up, man. They've got a team of lawyers on retainer. And even if you have a strong case, what a good lawyer does is they go into court and they don't shut up. And then they make you waste money. And they finally look at you going, you want to settle? And then you go, sure. And you get a fraction of what's coming to you, because you're maimed or blind or have cancer or whatever the case may be. So you'll read about this guy often in the textbook, Eugene V. Debs. Anyone come across him yet? I mentioned him in the textbook. Quite well known at this time, just like Mother Jones. He was a socialist. Ran for president like 4 times. And he never came close to winning, but in the election of 1920, he was running and he got arrested because he was speaking out against World War I. And Congress, under President Wilson's administration, passed basically anti-First Amendment laws saying if you speak out against the war, you can go to prison up to 20 years. So he got sent to prison, was sentenced to, I believe, 10 years. He was eventually pardoned. But he was in prison when he was running, and he got a little over 10% of the vote. Right now, on the surface, like, well, big deal. That's very low. But consider who could vote back then. Right? By now, I mean, it's still legal for Black men to vote, but because of what we studied in Reconstruction with the poll taxes, literacy tests, and the lynchings, they're not voting. Women aren't able to vote in most states. And so, yeah, white men are able to vote. And so obviously he's getting most of his vote from working class people. So the fact that he got 10% is very instructive because most working class people don't, it's not like today. I mean, there's laws that, if your employer has to give you like an hour break to go vote on voting day. In this state, we have early voting, which you should take advantage of. You go to any precinct and vote. So please do. Whatever your political interests are, it matters. Politicians react to when lots of people vote. They listen. They don't listen when we have below 30% turnout, which is very typical in non-presidential elections. But yeah, I bring that up because, again, whatever your views on socialism, like in America, we're kind of taught and raised to be very leery of socialism. Not during this time. People are fed up with capitalism. And what this guy is saying sounds really good. So he's pointing out the systematic problem here in a speech, Eugene V. Debs. Today, there are more than 2 million children working in factories. It's not a question of white labor or black labor or male labor or female or child labor. It is this system. It is solely a question of cheap labor. That's the problem. Not only is it exploitive, but for people that are pro-capitalism, in a capitalist system, if you own a business, you got to think individually. I need to make a profit in 3 months, right? Especially if you have a corporation, you're beholden to your shareholders. If you go to the board meeting and say, we didn't turn a profit, why? Oh, because we decided to pay our workers more money and we got rid of children because that's wrong. Well, if it can be proven that you did something as the CEO or on the board not to maximize profits, those shareholders can sue you. Happens all the time. So they have a judiciary responsibility to maximize profits every 3 months because they have these shareholder meetings. So that's what he's pointing out here. It's a systematic problem. So this is her at one of her events. I think it's with the children too. Someday workers will take possession of City Hall. Right? Very revolutionary stuff. And when we do, no child will be sacrificed on the altar of profit. The officials quickly closed the windows as they had closed their eyes and their hearts. Right? This is what she's up against, which can be very frustrating to somebody who's devoted to a cause. I think people who are activists and are concerned with this kind of stuff are just very sensitive people. I could be wrong on that. Maybe everybody's sensitive, and it's just civilization itself requires us to numb ourselves. I mean, especially like if you live in a big city, walking by homeless people, you got to go to work or you got a date, you got a coffee shop. You got to numb yourself. I mean, you can't, you can, but you open up your heart to all of the problems, man. It's endless. It'll take you down unless you humble yourself going, well, I can't solve everything, but I'm going to focus on, I don't know, in her day, child labor. And I know I probably won't be successful, but I could go to my deathbed knowing that I did something. So this is what she did. So in 1907, no federal legislation was introduced until this year. March of the Mill Children was in 1903. That's a direct result for her drawing attention to the situation. This is during the progressive era. So politicians, you know, they're kind of not all, but they're typically amoral people, not immoral, amoral. They're just transactional. And so the progressive era, yeah, people are engaged. People are writing their Congress members, calling them. Phones are starting to become a thing. Very, you know, you have to be pretty wealthy at this point. People are organizing, protesting. And so that 1907 legislation reflects a certain percentage of people in Congress going, yeah, we got to do something about this because the voters, they're demanding it. First federal law was passed, took a little while, 1916, but because of the kind of the conservative turn of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, the courts reflect that. And they're going to make an argument that, well, corporations are people and precluding child labor is taking property away from their ability to make wealth, away from corporations. And they're going to make the argument, this is not the purview of the federal government. We have to honor states' rights. 1919 to 1922, a new law was passed in 1919, but it was also declared unconstitutional in 1922. Child labor constitutional amendment was attempted, but it failed to pass in 1924. And it's not until 1938, during the Great Depression, that a federal law was passed in 1938 and was finally declared constitutional in 1941. And the reason why, and there's some well-intended people in Congress that said enough is enough, we need to do this, but understand this is during the Great Depression. You got 25% unemployment. Why is it practical now to, at the federal level, to make child labor illegal, or at least to regulate it heavily with 25% unemployment?
Let's get to work.
So the adults get to work. Men need those jobs. Not only that, if you artificially, through legislation, curtail the labor pool, meaning no kids in the textile factories or coal mines anymore, that's going to automatically inflate wages. Because there's less people who can work. And so the employers are like, shoot, man, I got to pay you guys more. Because now you have choices. It's declared constitutional because FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, started playing hardball with the courts. He was up against the courts, knocking down, they were going to knock down Social Security courts. And what we have a sense that the Supreme Court is this sacred institution that cannot be touched. Read the Constitution. It's very interesting. Article 3, the beginning of Article 3 in the Constitution, it doesn't say, okay, there's this court system and here's what it's made of. All it says is that the Congress, from time to time, should ordain a Supreme Court. So most people aren't aware of that. So when the Constitution was first ratified, there is no Supreme Court. It took the Judiciary Act of 1789 for the court to be created. And so FDR is aware of that. And so what he begins to say in the beginning of 1936 is, if you guys keep shooting down the legislation, I've got 80% of Congress. The American people are on my side. I will have the Congress pass a law that puts more justices in the courts. It's what's referred to as court packing. And I guarantee you, he's telling the court system, I will nominate hardcore New Dealers to that. And the courts, who are supposed to be objective, I'm just reading the Constitution, calling balls and strikes, they all of a sudden started saying, okay, we will not interfere with your legislation, Mr. President, because they wanted to keep things the way they were. This is Eugene V. Debs reflecting on Mother Jones in 2 household names at the time. No other soldier in the revolutionary cause has a better right to recognition in this edition that has Mother Jones. Her very name expresses the spirit of the revolution. Go back here just to show you. I think the only footage we have of her, video footage of her, I think it was right here. So she's nearly dead. She's like, I think 100, maybe a little over 100. She's still fighting. She's haggard. She's on her way out, but listen to what she's saying here. It's kind of hard to hear. Let me turn it up. Now, notice that picture. It's an interesting picture that they're showing at the end of this video. Her 100th birthday. Those are men in suits. I don't know exactly who they are, but you could see her with pictures of presidents. So even though she's a royal pain in the ass to people of power, and it's just like mother show, it's sort of this attitude. She shows up and it's like, damn it. But highly respected. Because, I mean, they know she's right. It's just like, okay, she's right, but let's do what we can to mitigate what she's trying to do in this world. But that was, you know, the audio is pretty muffled. It's a very old recording from the late 1920s, I believe. But she's basically just saying, I long to see a day when the workers take over and finally are able to benefit from the wealth that they produce. Right. She was a revolutionary to her dying day. So what we're seeing here is not bad people being bad, making children work, exploiting workers. Oops, that's wrong. It's a system. That's really important to understand. It's important to understand because if it's a system, that system's still with us. And so there's always pressure, a dynamic to further exploit workers, to make sure they're paid less, to chip away at laws that go back to the 1930s that heavily regulate when children can work, what times they can work, where they can work. And that's been rolling back in the last 10 years. And so I want to conclude this lecture by looking at a recent news report from More Perfect Union that's looking at some state legislation that's being passed that's making it already legal for children to work after hours at slaughterhouses, in bars. So being 16, 17-year-old working at a bar around adults who are drunk, you can understand where that might go. There's a reason why there used to be laws against that. Why is this happening? Again, you've got corporations that might be populated of good people, but they are totally focused on maximizing profits. And they have a lot of capital and they can influence politicians much more so than we can, right? These corporations can pick up a phone and have a meeting with a politician. You can have a meeting with a politician, right? If you live here at McAllen, Monica de la Cruz is your House rep. If you're persistent, you know, don't expect her to go, yeah, I'll be right there. Like it might be a couple of months, but you can. Let me give you an example. No, I haven't talked about it in this class. My brother is a combat vet. He served in Kosovo in the early 90s and got mentally screwed up from what he experienced, not just in war, but his experience in the service. He's gay, and back then it was pretty hostile. So he's been suffering from mental illness since the mid-90s, severe mental illness. Not just, I feel bad, I'm depressed. Just, I mean, he's never had a career. He's just had, you know, he works in restaurants here and there. He loses his job. He's had a really hard time. He finally got seen by the VA, and there was some progress, but it was clear, man, nothing was working. I mean, he came and visited me last summer, and he was just a mess, man. I felt terrible for him. And then he found out that if the VA services aren't working, you can apply for private help. Like go to, he ends up at a resort in San Diego. where he had like 6 psychiatrists helping him, private yoga, cold baths, like all of these protocols that you hear about. If you were to pay for this privately, it would cost $150,000 to $200,000. So he went to the VA and said, I want that, because what's happening here is not working. And they said, nope, denied. So he called his representative. He lives in San Carlos, California. So his representative is a guy named Rokana. Explained the situation, and about a week later, Rokana's chief of staff called him up, right? Because basically he's explaining, hey, I'm a combat vet. I've been suffering from mental illness. I'm not getting any help. And so my brother explained the situation. VA is denying the service that's available. He gets off the phone with him, and the next day, the VA approved his service, and he went there for 90 days. And he's been out for about a month, and I talk to him regularly. He sounds like a completely different person now. He's, kind of gotten out of the way of himself. But I bring that up because, yeah, you do have access to your representatives. Not as much access to people with lots of money and corporations, however. So we see this kind of stuff. So let's take a look at what's going on today with child labor. Because we get, one thing we get kind of, we make assumptions. Okay, there were these laws passed. Child labor is no longer a pervasive thing. It's still a thing, but we've got civil rights legislation. There was a guy named Martin Luther King that did some great things. Cool, we're good. No, because we live in a system that's predicated on wealth accumulation and predicated on very old systems that go back to civilization, where it gives certain people a sense of superiority. Whether you're a man, I'm more superior to women. Whether you're white, I'm more superior to black people. Whether I'm a capitalist, I'm more superior to workers. Those attitudes, that's part of the system that people like Mother Jones were trying to deactivate, or at least bring attention to. So we should expect these things to come back unless we're informed and vigilant about this. And I don't mean that the answer is for us all to become Mother Jones. It could be as simple as just being engaged with your community. Volunteer. Anyone here volunteer regularly?
I used to in Austin, but at a soup kitchen.
Okay, cool.
I used to volunteer at my church.
Okay, excellent. What'd you do at the church? Just help out?
Like bingos, or sometimes like help clean up after mass, or help with like loteria, help with the food service, just stuff like that.
That stuff's revolutionary, because I mean, we're raised to go, no, your time is money, man. Anytime you're putting labor into something, you should be getting paid. So it's very difficult for like places like the food bank to get people to volunteer, because people are just like, well, somebody else is doing it, and I need to be on Netflix right now, or I need to watch what's on my phone, or what can I really do? What happens when you do that? Like if you volunteer at the food bank, you don't see it, but I mean, you'll see the families. Like it's crazy how many cars roll up. But those are people who, I don't know, the husband got laid off, somebody's sick, and they can't work, or they can't work sufficiently to pay their bills, and they don't have food in their house. The food that they have, they got to make stretch. And so that does this to people. It tenses them up. And then they go to work and they're tense, and somebody says something to them and they flip out. And then that person absorbs that toxicity, and then they take it home, and then they yell at their kid, and then their kid goes to school and they get in a fight. And that kid who got beat up goes home and beats up his little, it spreads. But if people take the time to volunteer for McAllen, make McAllen beautiful, the food bank, You don't get to see the results, but I guarantee you, because they give a lot of food away. It's amazing how, I mean, the last one I was at, we were we were just dumping stuff in people's trunks. It looked like $800 to $900 worth of groceries, meat, milk, bread, pastries, vegetables, fruit. But that helps people relax a little bit. Hey, we're fed. And then you go to work, you go to church, you're a little bit more relaxed. And that can emanate not just in the community, but that can spread to City Hall, Austin, Washington, D.C. I think a lot of what we're seeing is people have been so focused on myself, the self. That's part of our culture. And so people with power and money focusing on their self, well, they're making life pretty difficult for us, falling into long-standing patterns that have existed for not just through the duration of the United States, but throughout civilization.
I'm just kind of stepping back on that one. I'm going to not get into any conversations. I'm going to stay away from that, although you might find out later why. Oh. There you go. There's your tease.
Senator Schultz is clearly proud of his work, but as our investigation will show you, he's just one part of a shadowy national effort funded by big corporations and PACs to roll back child labor laws that have been in place since the 1930s.
More states are considering changes to child labor laws as they try to fill jobs. Maine and Michigan lowered the required age to serve alcohol. New Jersey raised the limit on the number of hours teens can work over the summer. In Minnesota, a new bill would allow 16 and 17-year-olds to work construction jobs. In Iowa, a proposed law would let 14 and 15-year-olds work certain jobs in meat packing plants.
The Iowa bill takes child labor law rollbacks to the next level. Think kids in ultra-dangerous meatpacking facilities, high-volume Pepsi bottling plants, and working for cheap on the searing hot ovens of fast food chains like McDonald's for 30-plus hours a week. No, for real. Iowa Republicans want to allow kids between the ages of 14 to 17 to work in incredibly dangerous, often deadly workplaces. Places like construction sites where more than 5,000 workers died last year. As it's set up now, there would be virtually no restrictions. The job would just have to be part of an education program, something that the company could invent itself. It's true that more than a third of teenagers across the US worked summer jobs in 2021, but serving ice cream isn't exactly the same as working in building demolition. So why would lawmakers put kids who are just finishing middle school into such dangerous situations? Here's what Rep. Deo, the House sponsor of the bill, says.
Right now, kids can be out till 10 o'clock if they're out for a sport or a school activity. And so why are they not able to work until, say, for example, 9 o'clock?
An actual expert we spoke to firmly disagreed.
It's a bizarre argument to argue that playing team sports is akin to working in a factory or some other dangerous environment. We like kids not to work more than 20 hours a week because that's kind of a cutoff for damage that's done to them educationally.
Okay, so why are lawmakers actually doing this?
The bill was really spearheaded by the Restaurant Association. We sort of came along. We were asked to be, we were invited to come along.
That's Brad Epperly, a lobbyist who works for big corporate clients like the Iowa Grocery Industry Association. He's outright admitting to us that the Iowa Restaurant Association was the driving force behind this bill. They're an affiliate of the National Restaurant Association, a trade group that represents some of the biggest names in fast food, like Burger King and Taco Bell. They also lobby for big corporations like PepsiCo and Cisco. And from one look at their newsletter from this time last year, you can tell they've been hard at work spreading the gospel about the benefits of young labor. The hands-on internship at the slaughterhouse is their big priority this year, but we can't give them all the credit. This child labor law rollback originated at a meeting of the Iowa Workforce Development Board, which is overseen by Governor Kim Reynolds. Most of its members are corporate CEOs and lobbyists, and they meet up several times a year to come up with new policies. This bill was a product of a meeting in November. The WDB is chaired by Jay Iverson, executive officer of the Association of Iowa Builders, hence the emphasis on kids using bandsaws on work sites. Lobbyists from the Iowa Association of Business and Industry are well represented on the board, which gives member corporations like John Deere and Google seats at the table. And of course, no race to the bottom would be complete without the Koch-funded Americans for Prosperity and Opportunity Solutions Network, also lobbying on the bill. Given their obvious
Right? Sarcastic. Yeah, questions, comments about what you just saw? How it relates to what Mother Jones was trying to point out? Yeah, how's it unethical?
Happen to them while working, they might not help them.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the legislation that didn't go through, luckily, but yeah, they were trying to avoid liability if a 14, 15, 16-year-old gets hurt at a construction site, demolition site, or a slaughterhouse. If one doesn't find this unethical, and there's people that say, hey, kids should be able to work, families need money, and this does teach them work ethic.
Isn't there like a difference between like a child who may be working like 30 or 20 hours compared to like more than 30 or 40?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, there's a reason why traditionally people under 18 between 15 and a half to 16 or 18 could only work 20 hours because, I mean, you're going to school all day. So when are you going to work? Well, you're going to work in the evenings. So you can't have people who have, kids who are trying to get an education who have to be at school at 7:45 working till 10, 11, 12 at night, right? Those students are going to probably drop out of high school. So there's all sorts of ethical comments. Yeah.
Have you ever visited a Amish community?
Yeah. And that's different. And this is where the argument back then would say, well, kids have worked on farms for centuries. That's part of a family unit.
Well, in Amish community that I visited, they have kids working in restaurants, and I'm not, when I say kids, I don't mean like teenagers. They're like 8. Like
Okay. I mean, yeah, there might be a judgment we could make there.
But
are they like family-owned restaurants?
Kind of.
Okay.
It's not like a corporation, but it's like a pretty big business.
Okay.
For that area, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's part of it. They probably got some sort of religious exemption there. I don't know. Yeah. But even if one doesn't find any ethical problems with this, because clearly some people don't, because these laws are passing here in Texas as well. Why is this bad for working people?
Adding more laborers to the job pool.
Yeah.
So, like if you add a bunch of illegal immigrants to the job pool, they'll choose the illegal immigrants over.
It's cheaper labor.
It's cheaper, right? Yeah. Immigrants are going to work cheaper. Children are going to work cheaper. So you're in your 20s trying to find a job and they're like minimum wage, take it or leave it. And they mentioned that this started occurring after the pandemic or during the pandemic. And that's not a coincidence. A lot of people who were at home were like, why am I going to go back to that minimum wage job or for working for $9 an hour? It gave people a time to think. And so it was kind of weird for about a year. Like, yeah, there were McDonald's begging for workers, $20, $30 an hour. We were driving to California and I would see $30 an hour working at McDonald's. That didn't last. It does tell us something that if they need to, they could pay people
livable wages.
A livable wage. But they would rather not because they want to maximize profits. But they do have the money to pay. We'll study more about the wealth disparity going forward. And More Perfect Union, this is a pretty popular YouTube channel, but I scoured ABC, CNN, Fox News. They don't talk about this. Right? You have to go to it's not obscure, it's pretty well known, but if you're not paying attention to these issues, you don't know you would never know this media outlet exists. Okay, let's take about a 5-minute break and then we'll get into women's suffrage. gearing up for the film we'll watch tomorrow, Iron Jawed Angels. All right. Let's get back to it. So we're switching gears here. We're in the progressive era. I'm going to let the textbook speak to itself. That's just an era of tremendous reform. It's just understand the timeline here. You have a generation of the Industrial Revolution. It ravages the landscape, exploits a bunch of people. A lot of environmental degradation is happening. And so the following generation is getting not just politically active, although that's happening a lot, but they're getting engaged in their communities, in urban areas, small communities, and demanding politicians to not just listen to the interests of big business, but to try to create a system where everybody can flourish from the wealth that is developing. That was the basis of it. So you see reforms in consumer products with the FDA. You see monopolies being dismantled, or at least that's being called the question. You see the press getting highly involved. They're being referred to as muckrakers. That's what Theodore Roosevelt called them, mucking up the raking up the muck. You see, like under Theodore Roosevelt, if you're ever, we don't have too many here in Texas, but if you ever go to national forests and camp and hunt in there and fish, beyond the fee you have to pay for whatever, for camping, that's your land. You just go there. I have a friend who lives up in Telluride, Colorado. His backyard's in a national forest, and he just takes, during elk season, takes off work for 3 weeks, goes and gets himself an elk, and that feeds him for the whole year. Right? That's all a result because Teddy Roosevelt was a great outdoors guy. He's a very interesting person, Teddy Roosevelt. But he saw the writing on the wall that if something isn't done, corporations are going to buy up all of this land and the forests and the rivers and the lakes and the hunting grounds. He was a big hunter. All of that's going to be eliminated. So he kind of stretched the bounds of the Constitution quite a bit and just had the Treasury buy up as much land as possible. He didn't start that. That goes back to Abraham Lincoln with Yellowstone, but he was very aggressive with that. But you also have the women's rights movement kind of at its apex during this time, during the progressive era. Now, but the women's rights movement goes back to the 1840s, right? Or even the 1830s, which we'll talk about. It's just what we see during the progressive era. Finally, with the passage of the 19th Amendment that guarantees a woman's right to vote no matter what state they live in, that was their ultimate victory. That was the result of a 72-year movement. Now, just like what we saw with child labor, we need to be aware that just because we have this 19th Amendment passed in 1920, that we're good. Cool. Don't have to worry about that anymore. No, there's very powerful people who, because that wasn't, one, we'll see how that barely passed the 19th Amendment. And it was controversial then. For a while, I think it was like, okay, yeah, women can vote. But in recent years, we're seeing people who are very connected thinking that we should revisit the 19th Amendment. So I want to start off, before we even get to this lecture, to introduce us to a guy named Doug Wilson. Anyone know who Doug Wilson is? He's a very, very well-known pastor, I think based out of Idaho, but he's got churches all over the country, including one in Washington, D.C. He is the Secretary of Defense. They refer to the Secretary of War, but it hasn't been passed by Congress, so it's still officially the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth's pastor. And yeah, he has some, he's old school, right? He believes women are here to serve men, and they should be subservient and submit to men. So let's take just a quick look at what he's doing. And this guy he's not just the pastor to Pete Hegseth, but he's also the pastor to some prominent Congress members and senators currently. Okay, bullshit.
Oh my goodness.
That's an Olympian feat to give birth. That takes preparation, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. So, yeah, I don't feel out of bounds at all to say this guy, I don't know what happened to him as a child, but I don't know. I suspect some serious mommy issues.
Repealed. I would support that. And I'd support it on the basis that the atomization that comes with our current system is not good for humans.
And Wilson, a veteran himself, is unapologetic about his view that women shouldn't be in certain leadership or combat roles.
Looking at the leadership page for Christ Church,
Right.
It's all men. Do you accept women in leadership roles in the church and in government?
In the church, no.
Why?
Because the Bible says not to.
Well, that's not what happens in the Bible. Women do lead all the time.
Progressive faith leader Reverend Jennifer Butler is concerned about Wilson's growing influence.
He is rapidly gaining in power. He has hundreds of churches established around the country. They actually literally want to take over towns and cities, and they have access to this administration.
Wilson's highest level connection to the administration is Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
It's not organizationally tied to us, but it's the kind of thing we love to see.
For his part, Hegseth has publicly praised Wilson.
Now we're standing on the shoulders of a generation later, the Doug Wilsons and the others.
Women are the kind of people that people come out of.
So you just think they're meant to have babies? That's
Well,
it.
Oh, I didn't realize this quote was from that guy.
submit to men first, and the second verse, or like following up with that, it's also men adhere to the woman or submit to the wife. I believe that that's what's also stated too. Like, so a lot of that stuff's taken out of context.
Yeah. Yeah, I go to a Eastern Orthodox church. That the phenomenon with Eastern Orthodox is a lot of young men are joining it. Like our congregation is 25% young men. And that's both great, but also a problem, because the reason why young men are coming to it is it's a deeply conservative church, not politically conservative, but their values, I mean, they go back a couple thousand years. So it's inherently just conservative. And I hear this, the young men are just like, yeah, I want to get married. I want my wife to submit to me. I want to be, and he points that exactly out. He's funny. He's a funny guy because he's like, oh, you want that, huh? Careful what you're asking for. Because in the context of Christianity, right, based on Jesus's life, what happened to Jesus?
He died
on the cross, a sacrifice.
Sorry.
Right? So there's all sorts of ways of following Jesus, believing in Jesus, but my exposure to Christianity, he is a model for men and husbands to totally submit in love to your family.
Yes.
You eat last, right? Everybody sits down, you eat last. If there's not enough food, you don't eat, right? If your wife is doing something in the house, your ass is up off of the chair doing something. You're not watching the sports, right? Unless you are already doing something and got everything done, it's time to relax. But this idea that you are having that is backed by any faith, let alone Christianity, that you get to get married so you have somebody that is there to pick up your dirty underwear and make you a sandwich. Well, see what happens in the course of your life. Maybe some women could endure that and it's just fine with them, but there might be a tendency for resentment and bitterness to happen, and it gets manifest in all sorts of unexpected ways, providing a miserable life for the entire family unit. Because it comes from a sense of superiority. And as human beings, that's just we walk, we talk, we grow hair, and we have an inherent need to be treated dignified. And that doesn't say we don't have different roles, right? I understand that, right? Obviously, women have the role of birthing children, men don't, and that comes with inherently different roles in how families are organized. But that doesn't necessarily mean that because people have different roles in families, that there should be a sense of superiority. Just like in societies, I mean, has anyone ever kind of done a rabbit hole on what's going on in North Korea, how those people behave there? They're very strange people in North Korea. They're scared. And they act scared because their premier has absolute authority and could just look at you and say, hey, I don't like the way that guy looks. Men, kill him. Right.
Generations of your family too.
Yeah, it affects generations, right? So let's take a look at where this comes from, right? So we're looking at the women's rights movement, the beginning of it, 1830s to 1850s, and we're going to go all the way up to the 1920s. So what we're taking a look at here is, one, a long history of misogyny. What does that word mean, misogyny?
The belief that men are superior.
Yeah, I mean, that's the implications of it. Absolutely. It literally means gyne, like gynecologist. It's Greek for women. Miso is hatred. So it literally means hatred of women, which is historic. It's the basis of civilization, of how women have been treated throughout civilization. And so I bring that up, and we're going to look briefly at Greco-Roman culture and how women were viewed and treated. So it's not like this is inherent to American men. This is human beings absorb so much that they're not even aware of from history and just momentum of culture. And so you could think I'm being a decent person, I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm fulfilling my role, but yet you're causing damage because you haven't self-reflected, because you don't realize I'm absorbing thousands and thousands and thousands of years of very powerful momentums, one of which could be misogyny. We'll take a look at the Enlightenment and the Second Great Awakening. We'll look at this concept of women's sphere as it developed in the Industrial Revolution. And we'll look at the catalyst of the women's rights movement, the abolitionist movement. So going back before the Civil War, this is going to kind of enlighten women to realize if we want to get rid of slavery, we have to have a political voice in this country. So the intellectual origins of misogyny, deeply rooted in societal structures, ancient Greco-Roman culture, norms that historically defined and restricted women's roles, philosophy, classic philosophical treatises, didn't invent misogyny, but they reflected the views of warlike cultures. And anytime you have a society that is warlike, women tend to take a back seat in their ability to contribute to society, have a voice in society. And then we'll look at Christianity. Not that Christianity is inherently anti-women, but there are passages in the Bible where if you are disposed to looking at women as inferior, well, you can cherry pick parts of the Bible to justify that. So Greco-Roman world, right? The broader intellectual, legal, and social frameworks of antiquity that systematically defined and restricted the rights and statuses of women. Not just politically, but even sexually. Their views of study, if you want to get really weirded out on sexual norms of an ancient people, study Rome. It was basically very dichotomous. There is the penetrator and the penetrated, right? This is where we have a misunderstanding of how they were also homosexuals and accepted homosexual. No, they didn't. That concept didn't exist. To the degree that there was homosexual sex, it was a way of dominating, right? Just like a dog does at the dog park, right? If I could penetrate you as a man, I'm dominating you. I'm putting you as a man in a position of weakness. So you had lots of older men having pedophile relationships with young men. And then at war, that would be an act of war, not only raping women, but raping men as well. And as a result, Greek women's society, their primary civic domestic function of women, just like Doug Wilson was saying, was reproduction of children, especially sons. That's it. That was their role, right? So I'm going to bring up a quote of Aristotle, very disturbing quote, but please, if you study Aristotle in philosophy classes, don't use this as a basis of discounting him. He's reflecting his time. He's a product of his time. And this is what he's saying here is perfectly normal to him. Aristotle is a great contributor to the whole canon of philosophy. Created a whole mathematic way of dissecting arguments that if you study it can be very helpful in your life. Logos, logic, right? But what he says here is horrible. Just as it sometimes happens that deformed offspring are produced by deformed parents, and sometimes not, so the offspring produced by a female are sometimes female, sometimes not, but male. Okay, where's he going with this? The reason is that the female is, as it were, a deformed male. And the menstrual discharge is semen. I don't know where he's getting this stuff from. But anyway, though in an impure condition, i.e., it lacks one constituent and one only, the principle of soul. So according to Aristotle, what are women?
A deformed male.
Without a what?
Without an genitalia.
Now they got genitalia.
Oh, without a soul.
Without a soul. Deformed, yeah, they're just basically deformed men without souls. Well, if that's your worldview on women, yeah, obviously that's a sense of superiority. You're able to beat them with impunity, kill them, sexually assault them, exploit them, rob any sense of agency from them. If you're if you're one of your major thought leaders thinks this, and again, he didn't invent this, he's just reflecting what men thought. It's a warlike society. So this is typically what happens in warlike societies. We're seeing it today. Women in Christianity, right? So there's a whole host of things I can bring. This is from one of Paul's letters, Timothy. Let the women learn in silence with all subjugation, but I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. For Adam, this is always the debate, was the first form, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in transgression, right? So kind of affirms if you're predisposed to viewing women from a sense of superiority, you read something like that, and you don't read further, well, that could be the basis of how you, an affirmation of how it's okay to treat women. Leviticus, oh, sorry, the coloring is off there, but Leviticus is the book of laws. Here's one of the laws. And the daughter of any priest, if she profaned herself by playing the whore, she profaneth her father, she shall be burnt with fire. So this passage was justification for the thousands of women that were burnt at the stake in Europe for witchcraft, right? Which was usually a woman that was older, a midwife, maybe outspoken, didn't bear children, kind of an outlier. Oops. One second. Okay, something's wrong with the feed anyway. Okay, getting into the American Revolution, I'm just trying to give a basis of just this culture of superiority. So Abigail Adams and John Adams were a very peculiar couple in the Revolutionary era. John Adams goes on to be the second president of the United States, played key leadership in the independence movement from Great Britain. And a lot of what we know about the Revolutionary era, the independence movement, comes from their correspondence. They're a peculiar couple because almost in all cases, except for this one right here, he was an unusual husband who had a great deal of respect for this person right here. He viewed her as his intellectual, probably superior, at least equal. And that was recognized by the other founding fathers. But if I had to say what's going on here, what you're about to read, look at the date, March 31st, 1776. I'm going to read a plea of Abigail Adams. She's in Boston. Her husband has been away for months in Philadelphia planning this independence, this revolt. So she's wondering what's going on, right? Are we declaring independence? And so when you read his response, it's very, it's not respectful. So if there's any grace I would give him, it's not excusable, but any grace, I think he's a little stressed out, and understandably so, because if this fails, off with his head, right? The king has already said, if I find you guys, I'm going to cut your heads off. So he's probably a little stressed out. But this is what she writes. I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. Right? So, very astute observation. Just she was very well read, knew her history, observed what was going on around her. And obviously, if men have a sense of superiority, by definition, yeah, they're going to be tyrannical against women. Is she asking for anything specific here?
For him to just consider the woman.
Yeah, I mean, she's not saying, can we vote? Can we have representation?
She's just asking for consideration.
Yeah, just, hey, remember us. Don't forget us, please. So here's his response. your extraordinary code of laws, she didn't ask for any laws, I cannot but laugh. So he's laughing at her. We have been told that our struggle has loosened the bonds of government everywhere, that children and apprentices were disobedient, that schools and colleges were growing turbulent. And he goes on, Indians and Negroes are insubordinate to their masters. And now you, honey. One, that's true. This is one of the significance of the American Revolution, even though it's taking generations. But one of the things that the American Revolution upended that really makes it revolutionary, there's some conservative aspects of the American Revolution, but it called into question this age-old concept that has been the underpinning of civilization itself, of essential hierarchies. Something essential about me, my family, the color of my skin, my gender, gives me authority over other people. Not my merit, not what I've done in life, not the natural respect that I gain from others through my work and through my words and through my deeds. Essential hierarchies, so white supremacy, monarchies, right? Men over women. And yeah, the American Revolution, because of the lofty words of the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. Well, Native Americans are reading that. African Americans are reading that. Women are reading that. And it's not like they're learning that. Like, I didn't know I was equal. It's written down on a piece of paper. Cool. I just learned I am equal. No, it's an affirmation. It's the equivalent of being brokenhearted and you hear a sappy love song and you start crying. The love song isn't telling you you're heartbroken. It's just like, this song feels my pain. I'm getting a release here, right? So part of what the women's rights movement, the American Revolution, is predicated on is a philosophical movement, especially the American Revolution, which roughly happens in the mid 1700s to the early 1700s through the mid 1800s, mainly in Europe, but also in colonial and then America. And writ large, what these philosophers were arguing and upended was, one, the very concept of essential hierarchies, and two, that governments and the basis of their power, one, isn't essential based on the families that rule. Power derives, as the Constitution says, from the people, because people are individuals. And what the enlightened philosophers argued is individuals, by their very virtue of existing, have worth. And so this is just one of many definitions. Immanuel Kant is one of the main players of the Enlightenment movement. So he's offering a definition here. Enlightenment is man leaving his self-caused immaturity. Immaturity is the incapacity to use one's intelligence without the guidance of another. Such immaturity is self-caused if it is not caused by lack of intelligence, but by lack of determination and courage to use one's own intelligence without being guided by another. Sapere aude, have the courage to use your own intelligence, is therefore the motto of the Enlightenment. So he's not saying by intelligence, as he's pointing out here, he's not saying the Enlightenment is for smart people. Everybody has the capacity to be intelligent, which is to think for yourself. Look around. Does this make sense? Is there a reason for this? Can it be argued to perpetuate? So if you think about the women's suffrage movement, what do you suppose is the argument that women are going to make that they should have the right to vote? Practically speaking.
Because they're able to think for themselves.
That, but they're around people that go, no, you're not, you're a woman.
But isn't it to use your own intelligence?
Yeah, but what he's saying there is once you think for yourself.
Without being guided by another?
Yeah, make an now you have the ability to make an argument. So what's the practical argument that you, not just women, but anybody who's an adult should have the ability to vote.
Because you're an adult.
Yeah, that's just your opinion, man. I'm
I don't know.
joking there, but
You pay taxes, so
Yeah.
you should be represented.
and who passes the taxes? The politicians. So I should have an influence in that. I got to pay taxes and I have to abide by these laws. So that's what using their intelligence, thinking for themselves. Please, men, give me an argument that brushes aside that if I pay taxes and abide by the laws, that I don't have a right to vote. And the only argument they're able to give is, well, you're a woman. How can you vote? Right? That's not a counter argument. Right? That's what he's pointing at. Once you think for yourself, then think about, well, look around. Is there reason for what's going on? If there is, then maybe we keep it. They're looking around going, no, this world is a mess. I am an adult. I can contribute to functional change. No one listens to me because I don't have a vote. I have to pay taxes. I have to abide by the laws. So the Enlightenment is, one, it gives way to the American Revolution, and then it's going to give way to a lot of these movements that arise during the antebellum period prior to the Civil War. And it's predicated on the Second Great Awakening, this big revival, very emotional laden religious movement from itinerant preachers that had a huge influence on society. And there's a lot to the Second Great Awakening, but to distill it to one of its essence, these people, a lot of these people who are swept up in this revival movement believe that Jesus is coming back soon. And what is Jesus going to see? Jesus is going to see slavery. Jesus is going to see prisons filled with people wasting away. Jesus is going to see poverty. Jesus is going to see people being drunk and hurting people and hurting themselves and their families. Jesus ain't going to be happy with what's going on. So it gives rise to political movements, social political movements predicated on their very deep faith that Christ is king and he's coming back and he ain't going to be happy. So you got the temperance movement, this is going back to the 18 teens and 20s, but also part of the progressive movement. What is the temperance movement?
Isn't it alcohol?
Yeah, the abolition of alcohol, right?
Being against alcohol.
Yeah, and why are women against alcohol?
Because of the abuse and anger it can produce.
Yeah, right. If you don't have the law protecting you, right, you get beat up by your husband and you can't call the police.
There's nothing you can do legally.
Yeah. Well, maybe this won't be as bad since the law doesn't protect us if we get rid of alcohol. It's also, since I don't have agency in the home as far as finances are concerned, yeah, my husband is spending money on beer, ale, and whiskey when we don't have bread and we can't pay rent. Asylum and penal reform. So yeah, prisons, basically anybody who's mentally ill back then, they don't understand it. These are horrible places. The abolitionist movement. And so we'll get in the details of this, but a lot of women led the abolitionist movement. The Grimsky sisters, who were daughters of a big plantation family from South Carolina, were household names back in the day. And what they're beginning to realize is that, and they're deeply committed. And again, the abolitionists are a very small minority of the population. So they're up against it already. And women are beginning to realize that we need to get rid of slavery, but nobody's going to listen to us because we're women. And that's going to give rise to the women's rights movement, focusing on voting rights, suffrage. And then also education, access to education for women so they can have access to the professional trades. If they have the talent and the inclination for whatever, being a lawyer, an engineer, whatnot, right? Which was precluded to them. So what was it like to be a woman in the early 19th century? They're totally, well, one, they're unable to vote, obviously. They held the legal status of a minor. They're being treated like children. Keep meaning to dig that up. I won't do it now, but this is a weird thing about this whole misogyny. It leads men to both want to be married to someone who presents as a little girl and their mother at the same time. I need to see if I'm sure it's out there on YouTube, but just footage of female stars from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s.
Childlike.
Very childlike. Just think of the most famous Marilyn Monroe. Yes, she's very sexy, very sexual, but if you hear the way she talks like a little girl.
Baby talk.
Baby talk.
Betty Boop.
Mm-hmm. That's weird. Why would you want to be married to someone who acts like a child and acts like your mother? There are other options than having a spouse, having like a co-equal who has dignity and is able to tell you when you're messing up and you're able to tell her when she's messing up and there's no hurt feelings over it. It's just, we got each other's backs. Marital rights. Single women could legally own her property, but if you got married, you lost control over property and children. Women, the term was being legally dead. Prohibited initiating divorce. So men couldn't initiate divorce, but women had no right. And that was, you get some reforms in the mid 20th century, but it wasn't until the 1970s, which is we're starting to see pushback on this, but what's referred to as no-fault divorce. Right? So in all 50 states now, although there are some states, including Texas, that are trying to push that back. So it used to be that you had to prove to the judge of why you want a divorce. He's cheating on me, he's beating me. Now, you might still need to do that if you're wanting some sort of like compensation, some sort of alimony in the court. But if you're just going in there and saying, hey, it's just not working out, we want a divorce, it's no fault divorce. Like, okay, sign the papers, you guys are divorced. That was still around up until the 1970s. And again, there are people that would like to go back to it because there's concerns that divorce is too easy and it breaks up families and all of that. Well, it also damages families if you're in an abusive relationship, whether it's physical abuse or just gaslighting, spending money recklessly, right? It's not good for a family as well. Yeah.
My grandma had mentioned that growing up too, you'd have to have your husband's signature to get any type of like major surgery. Also require like for hysterectomies as well. And I feel like I think that might still be happening.
Yeah.
Today. You have to get signed off.
Maybe in some communities and states or just family cultures. But yeah, that used to be in my lifetime when I was a child, right? In order for a woman to get to rent a home, she would have to get her father's permission. To get a credit card, you'd either have to get your father's permission or your husband's permission. Again, treating people like a child. Right? So what we begin to see, and it goes back to the Revolutionary period, and it has different ways of manifesting as we get into the Industrial Revolution, the First Industrial Revolution, and the Second Industrial Revolution. So mothers had a role that was something that they were very proud of, Republican motherhood. So like families like the Adams, Abigail Adams, homeschooling was very prevalent. And they would teach their Latin and their Greek and their history and their philosophy. And it was in service to raise not just good Christians, but good children growing up as adults who would be good, small R Republicans, people who understood the value of representative government and all the virtues of the American Revolution. Well, that continues, but prior to the Industrial Revolution, it's not that these were the good old days for women, but women, because families, more or less, they produced their consumable goods. They made soap, they made the butter, they made their own clothes. And the entire family contributed to that, including the mom, the wife. And so they had a little bit of leverage in the home. Right? If your husband's acting a fool, well, maybe I'm not going to sew your breeches or tend to the sheep or the cows or the chickens until we have a conversation, right? The Industrial Revolution is going to rob women of any limited leverage that they had in the home. Because what the Industrial Revolution is mass production of consumable goods. And so you don't need a wife, a mother to produce soap, cotton, the textile, the clothing, or whatever is being produced within that home. And the Industrial Revolution, as we're studying, these are deeply faithful people. Christianity is centered to their lives, to their families. Well, think about the Industrial Revolution. There's an argument to be made that there's something anti-Christian about that. You're creating poverty. You are denying those that are poor. Yes, immigrants are coming in, but they're being treated bad. I mean, if there's one word in the Bible that comes up again and again, it's not only to welcome the immigrant, but to treat them well. So there's a anxiety that's developing with the first and the second Industrial Revolution that this growing industrial centralized form of capitalism that has power outside of communities and homes is really detracting the Christian character of men. Sometimes to be a good capitalist, you got to stab your neighbor in the back to make a buck. So are we going to lose our Christian character, our nature, our identity with all of this wealth that's being developed? Well, luckily, the woman is at home. She is the great civilizer. She is, after all, as the cult of domesticity would argue, is the moral superior to the man. That's not actually a good thing. Right? Women are not morally superior to men, just as men are not whatever superior to women. That's an example of essentializing all women. Right? Obviously, there are very good women in this world. Obviously, there are some terrible women in this world, just like the same for men, right? So to view women, that kind of expectation of you are the moral superior. And basically what it's saying is it's creating two different spheres. So this idea of a public sphere and a private sphere, right? This is for the male, this is for the female. This is the world of politics and economics. This is the world of the home. It's incumbent on the mother to get the children to church on time, to read the Bible, to pray, to give counsel to her stressed out husband who's not able to make enough money, and to keep him focused on Jesus. That's becomes this role for women. And I'm bringing that up because this is something that at the core of what women's suffragists are fighting is yes, they're fighting for women to vote, but they're also basically arguing also, please see us as individuals. We are human beings with different ways of looking at this world, and you can make judgments not of us as women, but as individuals, right? Of what we do and what we say. The women's rights movement is also predicated on dress reform. So you've heard of, these are referred to as bloomers. Well, that comes from a person, Amelia Bloomer, who did the radical thing along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Elizabeth Smith Miller of going out in public wearing what they called back then Turkish trousers. And it was a big to-do. Now, this wasn't a fashion statement so much, but what they were arguing against is pre-described beauty standards of the corset, which the corset, which accentualizes a woman's bosom, her behind, creates this appealing thing for a man to stare at. Well, that's especially Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was all about being beautiful. Very interesting. Partners in Crime. Susan B. Anthony. Think of pictures of her, kind of stoic, never smiled, didn't wear makeup. Elizabeth Cady Stanton loved being seen as beautiful and was very feminine. But what she would say is, ladies, don't be beautiful at the expense of your health, because that's what happens with a corset. It crushes your organs, right? Chaise lounges would be at stoops of stairs, because literally a woman would go up the stairs and would be at the verge of fainting because her breath is being constricted, and it would cause long-term damage. And women would die early or have significant health problems. So both of these individuals, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, were abolitionists. And deeply committed to it. And again, very small part of the population writ large. So I'm going to skip through a little bit of this because we're going to get out of time. Yeah, these are just other abolitionists that are involved, right? This is Susan B. Anthony's view on marriage. Worth reading here. The married woman and the legal status. What is servitude? The condition of a slave. What is a slave? A person who is robbed of the proceeds of his labor. A person who is subject to the will of another. So good definition of slavery there. I submit the deprivation by law of ownership of one's own person, wages, property, children, and the denial right as an individual to sue and be sued, to vote and to testify in courts is a condition of servitude, most bitter and absolute through though under the sacred name of marriage. So Susan B. Anthony would greatly advocate to young women, never get married under these, as long as these conditions persist, you are rolling the dice when you get married because you are willingly enslaving yourself. Not a very popular thing to say. Right? So very controversial person. So this is where the women's suffrage movement derives from, the 1840 World Convention, Anti-Slavery Convention. So all of the leading abolitionists are going to go to London and they're going to figure out how to get rid of slavery internationally, as well as in the United States. And so both of these women go, Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony. This is in 1840. And they get to the foyer, and the men who are the most radical people on the planet, very, very liberal people, men way ahead of their time, tell the women, those women, hey, ladies, why don't you wait in the foyer while us men figure out how to get rid of slavery, and then we'll let you know what we came up with. And that was a big reality check to them, because they obviously understood that most men discounted their beliefs, their individuality, their agency. But even men who understood, and this would be rare, that slavery was morally wrong, even they were subjected to discounting women's ability to contribute to something like the abolitionist movement. So it was a reality check basically to them saying, oh, if we don't have the right to vote, slavery is going to persist forever, because a lot of the abolitionists are women. And since it's such a small group of people, abolitionists, they need every hand on the deck for this. So what that's going to lead to is the Seneca Falls Convention. That's really the official beginning of the women's suffrage movement, 1848, that lasts 72 years till 1920. So we'll take a look at the beginning, the early movement, the opposition, and finally the victory. I'm just going to go through the slide real quick so we can get to it. But here's Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a younger drawing of her. She's considered the Thomas Jefferson of this movement. So you might not even have heard of Elizabeth Cady Stanton before this class. You've probably all heard the name, at least, of Susan B. Anthony. They were kind of partners in crime. Susan B. Anthony got involved in the women's suffrage movement in 1850, 2 years after the Seneca Falls Convention. But she has a lot of kids. I think she had like 6 children. So she knows how to write effectively. And Susan B. Anthony is known to this day because she would often read speeches written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So she's definitely one of the most influential leaders in this movement, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was the co-organizer of the Seneca Falls Convention. And again, her role, she is the intellectual leader of this movement for almost 3 generations. And at the Seneca Falls Convention, these are basically the 5 things that they are putting on the table. So basically the Seneca Falls Convention is about 300 people, mainly women, but some men, who are basically coming together to figure out, well, what should we focus on? And then once we vote on what we should focus on, let's devise strategies of how to affect society. So that's what that's all about. And so educational, professional opportunities for women, property rights, right? Legal equality, child custody rights, ability to, the agency to divorce as well, that comes with that, and suffrage rights. So those 5 things are on the table. So you got 300 people, including 40 men that are there. What's going to come out of it is a document called the Declaration of Sentiments based on the Declaration of Independence. Now, we see this a lot. Movements will use the template of the Declaration of Independence. You're like, okay, that's cool. This is the first time this has happened. It's women doing it. People are going to get pissed. Declaration of Independence is seen as a sacred document. And not only is somebody another movement is using it for their own purposes, but women are doing that. That's done on purpose. They want people to get pissed. Because when people are pissed, then they talk. And then other people listen. And maybe you have a room full of people that are all pissed off together, but there might be one little girl in there that goes, why are they pissed off about this? And then she grows up to be a woman, and now she's involved in the movement. So all of those 4 of those things passed. Which one do you think didn't pass? At the Seneca Falls Convention, made up of women who want to change society so women have rights. You got education reform, child custody rights, divorce.
Maybe about the property or no?
Nope, that passed.
Okay.
To vote.
Oh.
That's weird. You would think, I mean, the organizers of this were the one that's why they're there. The reason why it doesn't pass is, yeah, we fail to appreciate. I fail to appreciate just how radical this is back then, and what these women believe all of those things are important. I want access to higher education. I want access to the professional trades. If my husband leaves me, I want legal custody of my children. But they're worried that if we put voting on the table, then those things that we're talking about, nobody's going to take any of that seriously. Because voting for a woman, that's crazy. That's how people thought. I mean, they all believe they should have the right to vote, but they're trying to think practically here. This guy was one of the men in attendance, Frederick Douglass, arguably probably one of the most famous people in the world back then. And he spoke up on behalf of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, and basically makes the obvious argument here of, you guys aren't going to get any of this stuff unless you have the right to vote. So I agree with Miss Stanton. So he's got some gravitas. He's got a lot of cred. So they re-voted, and then they put women's suffrage on the table. But it's important to understand just how controversial this was. And it was incredibly controversial. So this is just going to read very quickly through just some of the passages of the Declaration of Sentiments using the Declaration of Independence as a template. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted deriving their just powers from consent of the governed. So pretty much the same, except they're adding women in there to make sure it's clear. We mean everybody. So these are the grievances in this Declaration of Sentiments. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. And what they're pointing out here is, yeah, women married are civilly dead. He has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. That was a term, a legal term. Deprivation of poverty has taken from all right in property, even to the wages she earns. Well, property, that's part of your inalienable rights. You have a right to your things. Someone more powerful can't take it away from you without just reason. He has made her morally and irresponsible, being as she can commit many crimes with impunity, provided they be done in the presence of her husband, right? So they're like, if you're at a bar and your wife is drinking too much and she gets in a fight with somebody, husband's there, hey, I could vouch for her, right? So it's again, trying to see what these women are saying, hey, we're individuals. We should be held accountable if we commit crimes. We shouldn't be treated as children. We're not the stewards of our husbands. In the covenant of marriage, she is compelled to promise obedience to her husband, he becoming to all intents and purposes her master, the law giving him power to deprive her of her liberty and to administer her chastisement, right? This is what Doug Wilson wants to bring back. And this is what in 1848 they're fighting against. They don't want to be seen as servants to their husbands. They want to be co-equal partners in the enterprise of cultivating a family. So yeah, the Declaration of Sentiments, it's going to get published in newspapers. And they're anticipating negative approach. And again, Elizabeth Cady Stanton is welcoming that. Imagine the publicity given to our ideas by thus appearing in a widely circulated sheet like the Herald. It will start women thinking, and men too. And when men and women think about a new question, the first step in progress is taken. So she's imagining probably arguments happening, right? Some husband reading the newspaper, throwing it on the ground, and a wife going, what's wrong with what they're asking? And then they start yelling and screaming at each other. And maybe there's a little girl witnessing this and going, huh. And then she grows up and now she's like, my dad, he was a good father and all of that, but he was wrong about trying to subject us. And now a generation later, she's part of the movement. Oops. So what are the arguments against suffrage back then? Well, women belong in the home. Women are creatures of emotion. Men are creatures of reason. Women are physically incapable of thinking about politics and are likely to become hysterical, cry, or faint in the voting booths. These are the kinds of things that would be said, right? Men are emotional too, right? They have emotions. They are unreasonable, right? We're a mixed bag that vacillates between reason and emotion. But emotions are, and then the problem with patriarchy is it discounts the role of emotion. Emotions are just almost like fire alarms, right? I'm angry, I'm sad. It's pointing to reason. Now, what are you going to do about this, right? How are you going to change things so you're not feeling this negative emotion? But yeah, to discount them, to say, oh, that's just the purview of women. They're always crying. And perhaps it's hard to say nature versus nurture. It does seem like women have a greater capacity to cry. But there might be some truth that if you're always gaslighting women, beating them, not honoring their agency, yeah, maybe you would be a little emotional too, if that was your constant state of not being taken seriously, right? Yeah, physiologically, right, again, biblical arguments. Eve got tricked by the snake and then tricked Adam. So women are to blame for everything, that kind of argument. The most powerful argument, temperance. And there's the merit to that, because in the progressive era, it's literally a constitutional amendment that outlaws alcohol. Part of the reason why that happened is by then, more and more women are voting in certain states, and that gave power to that movement of the temperance movement. So yeah, if you allow women to vote, they're going to take your beer away from you and your whiskey. Big argument, very argument. Now, the women's suffrage movement, we talked about this already, so I'll go through this quick, but it's derailed by the 14th Amendment, male citizens. So beautiful amendment, but yeah, the boys in Washington were like, because this is in 1868, this is ratified. Again, Seneca Falls Convention, 1848, 20 years. Still, majority of men and women think voting is crazy, but some men and some men in Congress are beginning to see the reason behind this. Like, yeah, they got a point. And so, and I'm emphasizing some men. Majority of men are like, well, this is a great way of giving Black men the right to vote in the South and derail the women's suffrage movement, because it splits the movement. So yeah, Jesus, you spoke of this when we were talking about interesting things about the chapter. It creates, on the one hand, an organization, the National Women's Suffrage Association, led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, and then ASA, the American Women's Suffrage Association, led by Lucy Stone. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was an idealist. She's also a white woman. She feels a bit offended that Black men are going to get the right to vote before white women. So there's an awful quote of hers. It's not Sambo's term. Sambo is a derogatory term towards Black people. Where Lucy Stone, obviously she's not happy about this, but she's like, well, let's work with Black men. They're going to be in office, and they will work with us to get the right to vote. And there were signs on that. The significance of the split is these are very talented people, very capable people, and they're pissed off at each other because she's trying to take a principled stance here. Like, do not support the 14th Amendment. We need to all work together, because what the 14th Amendment is going to lead to is the 15th Amendment. And so what Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, they're at Washington and they're talking to politicians and saying, you got to put the word sex in there, meaning you can't preclude someone from voting based on sex as well as color of skin and condition of former servitude. And so Lucy Stone is going, listen, it's not going to happen, Elizabeth. We just have to face reality. Let's work with Black men. They will get us the right to vote. It might take a while. And so this movement is split. And they're not talking to each other. Don't have time to get into this, but just want to get here real quick. But yeah, Susan B. Anthony and her sisters and some friends, they go to vote. They get arrested. She goes to court. What she's trying to do is get to court to find her guilty, and then she can take it to a higher court, and then she can make this, obvious argument that, hey, I'm an adult, I pay taxes, I abide by the laws. The judge sees right through her though and dismisses the case, and he treats her real badly. Those videos are interesting. We don't have time to go through them, but I want to get just to the end. The movement comes back together in 1890. NWSA and the AWSA reunite under the National Women's Suffrage Association, or NASA. So tomorrow when we watch Iron Jawed Angels, you'll hear them referring to NASA. So from 1890 to 1920, this is the main organization fighting for women's rights. Elizabeth Cady Stanton is the first president, and her goal is to get a constitutional amendment at the federal level to guarantee women's right to vote. That's her goal. After Elizabeth Cady Stanton dies, the next leaders, Carrie Catt and Anna Howard Shaw, step in, and they're a little bit more practical. We're never going to get the federal amendment. We got to work state by state. And they were effective, right? By 1920, before the 19th Amendment, here are the list of states that guaranteed a woman's right to vote. Not actually, it's not even a quarter of the states, though. So some victories here, but man, still 72 years. What you're going to see in the movie is, this is Alice Paul and this is Lucy Byrne, right? So these women here, obviously they're older women. This is the older generation, very practical. These are younger women, idealistic, and they're coming at this like, no, we're going for the constitutional amendment because that's the right thing to do. And we've been waiting for almost 70 years for this. So let's go for broke and get the federal amendment. The movie is a really good movie, but they kind of depict Anna Howard Shaw and Carrie Catt as kind of these old cranky ladies that are grumpy and like just these kids these days kind of attitude. But they had some real concerns because if they get the constitutional amendment in Congress and it goes to the states and it doesn't pass, the entire movement is going to be deflated. So what they're thinking in long term is once we get enough states, then we move to the constitutional amendment. But we can't go in there with just a handful of states and hope to get a constitutional amendment, because if it doesn't pass, we think of the big leaders, these individuals, but there are thousands and thousands of moms and just rank and file women behind the scenes doing the grunt work, letters and talking to people, showing up at protests. If the constitutional amendment doesn't pass, they're out. And then it's going to take another 10, 15 years to rebuild this movement. So you'll see that tension in there. But yeah, you're going to get introduced to some extraordinary individuals, particularly Alice Paul, extraordinary individual. So when we come in, we'll watch Iron. Has anyone seen that movie before? Iron Jawed Angels? You'll like it. Good film. We'll watch that tomorrow, which represents basically the last 8 years of the women's suffrage movement, 1912 to 1920. Big money day today. Never know. It's always good to show up. So we're still working on bundle 2 for a C. Please do. If you don't earn a C by tomorrow for bundle 2, then you owe me 200 EDCFs. You can get it back though if you get bundle 3 for a C completed a day before it's due next Monday.